Hi, this is Trine Bekkby from the Norwegian Institute for Water Research. I wish I was there, but I'm super happy that I can have this presentation for you. So the title is Hanging Gardens, Do Floating Kelp Farm Communities Resemble Natural Kelp Forests? So it's a collaboration between NIVA, the University of Oslo, Seaweed Solutions, and Sintef Ocean. And the project was funded by the Research Council of Norway. And it's based on the manuscript that has been submitted and will soon be published in Frontiers in Marine Science. And this is our study area on the Midwest of Norway for those that are familiar with Europe. For those who are not, you are and Hobart are around the corner to the lower right, and my study area is around the corner to the upper left. As you might know, the interest in seaweed cultivation is really increasing globally, also here in Norway. So we need to know a lot more about the potential effects on the marine environment, both negative and positive. So the aim with our study is to look at the fauna communities in the kelp farm and compare this with what we find in the wild kelp forest. And the aim has been to find out if a kelp farm ecosystem resembled anything like the natural kelp forest. So very quickly about the difference between the farmed kelp and the wild kelp forest. As you know, the wild kelp forest is a really complex 3D structure at the seabed. It's perennial, it's stable, it's a robust system with many species. But the kelp farm, that's a really simple monoculture in the water masses. So it's not part of the complex ecosystem that you find on the seabed. It's only out there for a couple of months, and it has an artificial substrate, buoys and ropes, etc., that is out for years. So there are many species found in the kelp farm. They are fewer, and there are a bit different species that we find than what we find in the kelp forest. So the kelp farm houses quite a lot of species, and the individuals. The amphipods and snails are the most common, both in the kelp farm and in the wild forest. The farm also had a lot of isopods, which were more uncommon in the wild forest. So the fauna communities in the farm and the wild kelp are different, and in general there are lower numbers of individuals and taxa and lower biodiversity, which is not surprising at all. As I said, the kelp farm is young and it's simple. It's only out there for a couple of months, so it's no surprise that the numbers of individuals and taxa and the biodiversity is generally lower than in the wild forest. But the kelp forest and the kelp farm and the wild forest are not the same. If you look here at the DCA plot, you can see that the species that are dominating the farm, which are encircled in the green, they're not the same as those dominating the wild forest, and definitely not the same as the yellow squares, which are species collected with fauna traps in the water masses. So it is something different in the kelp farm that is not found in the kelp forest. So we found that the fauna communities in the farm, they were more similar to the surroundings than to the more distant forests. So we had surrounding the farm consisted of Saccharina latissima and Alaria esculenta kelp, but around the farm we had Laminaria hyperborea. So the wild Saccharina latissima and the wild Alaria esculenta forests, they were a bit further away. So we found that the communities found in the farmed kelp, which again is the part of the DCA plot that's within the green circle, it was more similar to the communities found in the Laminaria hyperborea forest, the red circle, that was nearby, much more similar than to the wild counterparts found a bit further apart. So does this indicate that the fauna is just migrating from the nearby kelp forests? And what if then, does that mean that the farm is not sort of a distinct habitat, but it's just receiver of the species that is found in whatever communities it is surrounded by? So what if we are in a sea urchin grazed area with no surrounding kelp forest? If we have a kelp farm up in northern Norway, in which the kelp forest has been grazed by sea urchins, what will you find in the kelp farm? Will there be any communities, fauna communities there at all? We don't know that. Or is it just because the kelp farm is placed in what we call the Lahiplan? That means that the kelp farm is actually placed under wave exposure conditions that are more similar to the ones that we find in the Laminaria hyperborea areas. And that's why the fauna communities looks more like the ones we find in Laminaria hyperborea. So here you see some plot of the abundance and the number of taxa. And in the kelp farm, we have more animals and more species captured with fauna traps. That means artificial traps that are capturing mobile fauna than when we were scraping organisms off the kelp. So in the farm, we found more animals with the fauna traps. But in the wild, we found much more animals when we were scraping the kelp than in the fauna traps. And why is that? One suggestion can be that the wild kelp forest, it had years to establish a fauna community attached to the kelp itself. The kelp forests, they are complex ecosystems and stays there for years, establishing a fauna associated with the kelp. But in the farm, you have these really young kelps. They provide a less established habitats, so more of the fauna are mobile, and they have recently moved in from the surrounding wild forest. So that is why they are captured by the fauna traps, because they are the mobile fauna. So the conclusion is that the kelp farm, it functions as a habitat, and it serves a role as a hanging garden with many associated species. And the communities are dominated by mobile species, so-called young forest species. And the communities in the farm are similar to the surroundings. So it seems like they are receiving fauna from just the nearby areas. And I want to, at the very end here, give you a teaser of our next paper, which is about the potential for kelp farm being having a function as a stepping stone for trouble. Because in the autumn, after they had harvested all the kelp in the farm, and the farm consisted only of buoys and ropes, etc., we found a huge amount of the alien species Japanese skeleton shrimp, the Caprella mutica, in the farm. And we found no other Caprella species. Caprella mutica is from North Asia. It's considered an alien species in Norway. It needs substrate to attach to. It doesn't have any planktonic stage. It's very common on artificial substrate like rope, harbor materials, boats, buoy, fish traps, etc. And it's considered to be a severe risk due to the large invasion potential in Norway, and it's known to outcompete other species. So we found quite a lot of these. And we find no Caprella mutica in the wild forest, neither in the spring nor in the autumn. So does the kelp, when it's in the farm, does it block access to the artificial substrate for the Caprella? Or was this just a one-time effect, or does the Caprella mutica take over the farm after the kelp has been harvested? Is that a general rule? Well, we don't know that. We have to look into more farms. And will the artificial substrate, if we have more farms along the coast, will these introduce a stepping stone for trouble if the industry is upscaled? So to be continued later. And thanks to everyone involved, in particular the two master students, Ragnhild and Lars, who did a super great job on the project. Thank you.